Airbnb looks like an absolute disaster for the rental market and the housing market heading into 2023, which looks like a major recession, if not an outright depression. So this data is really shocking, and I'm going to dive into it with you right now. So let's get into this, starting with an article from 2020. I'm not going to dive into this too much, but Toronto and Vancouver real estate inventory may get a boost from Airbnb slowdown. Obviously, we know Airbnb during 2020 was affected by all the restrictions that were put in place on travel and the fact that people didn't want to travel because they didn't know what was going on and everything like that. And I'm not going to get into the weeds on that. But what I want to show you is this, because they were outlining in 2020 how Airbnb could be a massive impact. It could have a massive impact on housing inventory. And I think it's very, very interesting to look at this. So Airbnb boosts to Canadian real estate inventory. The potential increase in real estate listings if 25% of Airbnb properties were listed for sale. So at that time in Toronto, it was nearly 35%. In Montreal, it was nearly 26%. And in Vancouver, it was nearly 12-13%. So that's a big rise in inventory that it could contribute towards. And the other thing is, the flip side to this is it isn't just real estate inventory that Airbnb would likely contribute towards. It's also rising rental inventory, because of course a lot of those investors, they're not even going to be able to take the loss on their home and go and sell it at the real estate market, because they bought at the peak, they bought at the top. And this is one of the things that these mania cycles does. It just creates this herd mentality and behavior. And I remember seeing so many Airbnb courses and adverts everywhere during 2021, how you can be the short-term rental millionaire, and get rich quick schemes were everywhere during 2021. 2021 was definitely the year of the Ponzi scheme. But it happens during any of these manias, even if you go back to like the roaring 20s and explore what went on during those times. So this again is worrying as well when you look into the future, because this came out in January of this year. Canadian cities have seen up to 90% of new real estate supply scooped up by investors. And then when you get down into this, you can see that Toronto has seen 39% of recently completed homes bought by investors. Vancouver has seen 44% of its new supply go to investors, which is just insane. Ontario saw investors buy 1 in 3 new homes. And then it shows you this chart, which shows you how crazy these statistics really got. Places like Hawkesbury, Canmore, Woodstock, Barrie, like all above 40% of new construction was sold to investors. No, that's not immigrants like the mainstream media told you. That's investors. And this is what we've always been saying about, especially last year, the peak of the mania was really when you would see the most investors rushing in, the most speculation that happened. And this is what we really saw. And a lot of these people were justifying the purchases because they were saying, hey, we can just flip it to a short-term rental, we'll make lots of money. People, they're not really traveling that much, they want to stay in the country. So this is like the perfect storm for us to operate a short-term rental. And it was for under a year. And now it's just totally flipped, obviously. And I think when you look at this year in particular, you have to realize that this year was kind of just a response to the fact that people couldn't really travel and they were restricted during 2021 and 2020. So this year there's been like a massive uptick in the amount of people taking vacations, obviously, which you would expect coming out of the pandemic. And that's exactly what we've seen in 2022. So this is kind of an anomaly when you really think about it, because if you think about just what's happened this year, is it likely to happen into the future and next year? No, probably not. And if you go to some of these Facebook groups, you can see that a lot of super hosts and hosts on Airbnb are complaining that for next year, their bookings are completely down. They fell off a cliff and they don't know what's going on because they're so new to the game. They only got in during 2021. And that is just, it's mind-boggling, I know. People just think that these things will carry on forever, and they hope so as well because it makes them feel good. It makes them feel like they're going to be rich in the future. And it's unfortunate that humans do this because it sets yourself up for failure in the future. So we're going to look at the specific data, and we're going to start off with Canmore. I sent out an email last night to people on my email list. It's totally free. You can sign up in the description below when I was doing research for this video. And somebody replied, and they were talking about Canmore, saying that still there was a lot of demand from investors within Canmore. And you can totally see it on this chart. You can see how the Airbnb inventory just keeps going up, and Canmore and places like Soyuz, these are places that people typically go on vacation. So you've seen like active Airbnb rentals in 2019 in Canmore, 1,300. They're now over 2,000. So that's a huge increase in the amount of Airbnbs within Canmore. So a lot of the sales that happened in these places were people purchasing these short-term rentals, these Airbnbs. And especially in places like Canmore that are extremely touristy, that is really going to be interesting to see what happens next year, because there isn't going to be a lot of, there isn't going to be as much travel demand. Of course, there's always going to be some travel demand, but there isn't going to be as much travel demand. And what you've had is a glut. You've had essentially the bullwhip effect, which has played out in Airbnb to a T, where you had all this demand, prices were just going up and exploding for short-term rentals. But it was all artificial because of the government restrictions, because of the stimulus that was put in place, just distorted so many parts of the economy, including the Airbnb portion of the economy. Even if you can even call this a portion of the economy, I don't know. But it just goes to show how crazy things actually got. And when you look into other places, so I'll bring up Calgary and you'll see how the insanity continues. You know, Calgary has seen 24% quarterly growth in Airbnb inventory. It's now above where it was before the pandemic even began, heading into a recession. So, you know, if I was looking to buy real estate here in Calgary, which I'm not, then I would be looking at that and thinking that doesn't make me comfortable about buying a house in Calgary right now, because that number is going to have to come down, as you saw in 2020, which was essentially a very short-lived recession. And we're still going to have the major part of that recession that we didn't get come up right now. And then what's going to happen to the Airbnb inventory? Well, we can already see what happened during 2020, which is it went from 5,158, bottomed in Q4 2020 at 2,988. So 30% of the inventory disappeared. Some of that went to long-term rentals. Some of that will have gone to the real estate market. Now, the problem is a lot of people are going to have the problem of not being able to flip it to a long-term rental because they bought at such an unbelievable price. And you've already got this dynamic that's starting to flip already, exactly like what happened during 2016 and 2017 in Calgary, where you've got people who can't sell their houses and now flipping them to long-term rentals. And that is bringing down rent prices. And this will happen across the country. It's more of an impulse here in Calgary because it's happened before. People kind of understand the dynamic a little bit more, I think. So if we go over to Toronto, I mean, it's just mind-blowing when you look at this stuff. But again, Toronto, it had over 21,000, nearly 22,000 Airbnbs in Q3 2019. And it came all the way down actually during 2021, and then Q4 2021, it started to increase again. So investors, they are buying the dip. They can't help themselves. So even though prices are coming down. Investors are just continually going into there, stacking those dominoes up. So really, this shows you, I think, that we are nowhere near the bottom, in my opinion, just looking at things like that. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? Nobody can predict the future. But that's just what I'm looking at right now with this Airbnb situation, which I think is huge. I think it's a much bigger contributor to real estate prices and rental prices than people actually realize. And the thing is, we haven't seen Airbnb operating through a recession. So that's going to be a real shock to a lot of people what's going to happen, because travel demand tanks during a recession. If you look at the employed air staff, which we covered before in a previous live stream back in the summer, we saw that that didn't start to even recover until 2012. So that shows you travel demand was suppressed for 4 years after the recession. Because remember, the government said the recession was over in 2009, but was it? Not really. And that's what people don't really understand. So we can also head over to this just for a laugh, and then we'll end here. But this is Toronto, nearly 16,000 listings, and 58% of them are unlicensed, which is kind of hilarious because the city, has been trying to clamp down on Airbnb, and it's just pure virtue signaling, essentially. But it's interesting, these websites are great tools and they're free that you can use to take a look at this data, which I think is incredibly important. When we start to see the Airbnb inventories come down, if I was looking at investing in real estate, that would definitely make me feel more comfortable. And going back to this, it's not even just places like Toronto. If you go to Cabo San Lucas, which I'll be in very shortly, you can see that again, the inventory has absolutely exploded there. There you go, 6,757. And in Q3 2019, it was 4,800. That's like nearly 30% rise in inventory. It's absolutely insane. So many bubbles have been created by Airbnb. It's like Airbnb bubbles. And that's literally what we've seen. So it adds something that's very, very interesting to what's going on here. So anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, you might like this other video that I did on Airbnb, and also this other one that I did on Airbnb. I've done them in the past. I want to thank you so much for watching this video. Sign up to that free email list that's in the description if it floats your boat.